Thank you.
All right, let's now go to our segment, Book Review. And today in our Book Review, we sit down with Australian-born Tony Parker and discover why all his fiction novels are set in the African jungle.
I think people like to read about it and read about those magnificent locations, either that they know from growing up in this area or that they've astounded them as a first-time visitor. So it's to touch that chord inside people's heart that draws them to this amazing continent. It's never easy for a writer to go through that journey that you've just described there. It is a long, hard journey from the beginning. It's very hard to get published. The odds are against you, and there's no magic answer. I was lucky that I had a publisher in Australia that was looking for a novel set in Africa. That was simply it, and my manuscript arrived at the right time. Every writer will tell you the same story. They consider themselves very lucky, and they're very grateful to get published. It's very hard for a writer to survive off the income of, say, of one book, unless it becomes an instant bestseller. But that's not usual. I think it's like any endeavour. I was watching a very interesting documentary about a very successful African businessman, and he pointed out a couple of things. He says you must aim high. I mean, if you want to do something in life, you should try as hard as you can to do it, even if people tell you you can't make it. You must work hard, and you must be prepared to lose a bit of sleep, I think. So it is a long way. 10 novels, 9 novels out now, with the 10th coming out this year, and I've also written some non-fiction book. I can now just about pay my share of the bills in my household. It's a long journey, but writing is like any creative art. I think you must only do it because you love it. You shouldn't do it because you think you're going to make a lot of money. To take the other point about the book space, I think technology is really helping us here. I think in parts of the world people are scared by the rise of ebooks and the Kindle. Many of the countries I've travelled to in Africa, you know, the interesting thing is that there's a leapfrog effect. I think with the increase in say, data coverage, cellular phone coverage, the increase in handheld devices that you can read a book on, books will become pretty soon even more accessible than they have in the past through cost and also reach. So it's hard to physically distribute hard copy paper books across such a vast continent. The digital age may speed that up, and as these devices become more affordable, so too will the penetration of books increase, and the choice of books. I've been into many bookstores in the countries that I travel in, and I find the choice is very limited. Yet if you can get to a place where accessing the internet and accessing ebooks becomes affordable, all of a sudden the world of literature, every genre, becomes available to you instantly. So I see it as a positive thing in many ways. Safari guides in Kenya and Tanzania who are trying to get hold of my books generally as ebooks, sometimes because they've been given one by a tourist. So I see the market growing, and I see it as I think it's not just me in the books that I'm reading. I think fiction should not be dismissed, and I think popular fiction should not be dismissed, but it is probably something that people need to or can embrace once they have a certain disposable income. I think people who are focusing on their career, perhaps younger, struggling to get ahead, are going to gravitate towards perhaps non-fiction books, motivational books. But as income levels rise, as prosperity increases, fiction becomes a pastime. It becomes a leisure pursuit, and I think that what I'm finding is more people, more men and women now have the interest and perhaps the time to read what is basically for fun. I mean, my books are thrillers. They're not heavy literary fiction. It's meant to be for fun. I just think it's been overlooked, to tell you the truth. I think the very well-known guy Wilbur Smith from South Africa had a corner on the market for many years, and perhaps some people thought that I like his books. I read his books. Perhaps they thought this was a bit dated or belonged to another time, and I didn't look for a gap in the market. But what I did was write the sort of book that I wanted to read, which was a thriller set in the wilds of Africa, and the response I've had is that, interestingly enough, I've had interviewers such as yourself in other parts of Africa say, why aren't there local guys writing these books? And that's a question I would ask. Why not? Because there is a market for it, for sure. You know, as I said before, I think if the digital revolution can be overlaid into local education systems here in Africa, it's groundbreaking around the world. You know, even in my native Australia, you know, the schools, I think, are just coming to terms with things like iPads and things as educational devices. Sure, there's a cost outlay, but when you look at the ongoing cost of textbook and the price of hardcover textbooks and things, there can be economies here. I think you have to make reading attractive to young people. I'm very lucky with my books in that my sales have increased with each book, and they're now available in several countries around the world. I like to see writing and to think of different things to do. I like to push myself. I'm pleased to say that my second book didn't do very well, and then the next one doesn't do as well. I mean, I've had a gradual, slow increase in sales, which I'm very, very grateful for. But I think that's about spreading awareness of the books and tapping into more markets. And that's why I would see Kenya as a market that I'm very interested in, because I'm sure there's many people working in the industries that I set my books against that may have at least some affinity or understanding of the books that I'm writing. So as I said before, there's no silver bullet for getting published, and there's no silver bullet for writing a bestseller. Nobody knows what's going to be the next 50 Shades of Grey. I'm happy in that I can work at my craft and what I love doing, and get to a stage where with modest increases on the sales that I can support myself and use it as a vehicle to explore more and more of this fascinating continent. And I think it's a matter of awareness as well too. And as I said, I'm very grateful that my South African publisher has been able to get my books further north and east into Africa. So I'm very pleased when I can sort of see them in the shelves in Kenya as well too. It's tapping into a new market, one that's perhaps, you know, politically, geographically quite different to Southern Africa, yet with some similarities, I think, as well too, in terms of what motivates people, current affairs, issues, this love of the wild and wildlife, and the importance of it to the economy as well too. It's a big part of life in Kenya, as it is in other parts of Africa. You can do that perhaps by having books that are perhaps more closely related to their frame of reference, to their world, to their issues as well too. I know certainly when I was growing up, and possibly when you were growing up, the textbooks that I was reading, or the novels that I was reading, bore no relationship to my world, and that made them quite inaccessible, I think, in many ways. I talk at more and more schools now. I'm finding more and more, say, English language or English teachers in schools in Australia and even in Southern Africa are looking for ways to get kids interested. So maybe they're looking for thrillers, they're looking for books that are a little bit more out there as well too, and I think you've got to compete with children's time, but I do think that the spread of digital technology and perhaps the novelty of an e-reader may make it interesting. It's almost like it's another must-have kind of device for kids, but it's certainly practical because it does make books more accessible and perhaps more affordable if the hardware can be obtained. When I was a kid, I would have liked to read action-adventure type novels, not necessarily set in Africa. Maybe that Shakespeare has its place, but maybe something a little bit more contemporary as well.